I've always found something quite special about vintage lenses. It's not that they are remarkable in any way, but it is very exciting to see something so focused in its form. This now 40-year-old lens could pass off, as if it was modern-day gear, if not for the lack of some enhanced features. It's something, for example, that can't be said about the way we look at the images you create with them, as that has since shifted a lot in that same amount of time. And so today we're checking out this Canon FD 35 to 105mm f3.5, a beautifully designed lens from 1981. As mentioned in the previous video where we checked out the Canon FD 50mm, we are pairing it with the modern Fuji X-H2 camera. To make this work, we are using two adapters, the Mitakon lens Turbo Mark II, a nifty focal reducer that broadens the angle of view by 0.73 times and boosts the maximum aperture by a full stop. The second one is the Urth adapter, a straightforward hunk of metal that seamlessly connects the Canon FD lens to the Fuji X mount without any optical changes. I mainly bought this one so we can compare image quality and see what the focal reducer is doing. The Canon FD 35 to 105 is a testament to Canon's legacy. It uses the FD mount, a manual focus system discontinued in 1987. Despite its age, it performs pretty decently, but we will go into the details a little later on. My review is completely independent. I bought everything you see in this video out of pocket, but I always encourage checking out various reviews for a well-rounded perspective. The lens's focal length ranges from 35 to 105mm, translating to 53 to 158mm on an APS-C sensor, thanks to the crop factor. It has a constant aperture of f3.5 throughout the zoom range, which is pretty impressive for a zoom lens of its time. The minimum aperture stands at f22 at both ends, aligning with most lens standards. It feels very robust, thanks to its metal and glass construction. Weighing 600 grams, it's on the heavier side for a zoom lens, but it's manageable. It includes a macro switch for closer focusing at 35mm, which is a bit of a pain point, as its closest focus distance is 1.5 meters if you don't utilize this macro switch. It's not necessarily bad, but just something you'll have to get used to, as most other lenses achieve far closer focus distances. I don't normally wish to ask for these things, but if this video is proving valuable and you'd like to help out the channel, it really does help if you leave a comment and hit the like or subscribe. In addition, I would love to know what you'd like me to improve upon with this content, so if you find the time, let me know. Unfortunately, it isn't weather sealed, so be cautious in adverse conditions. It sports 3 rings. A smooth, accurate focus ring with a 270-degree throw, and a smooth 60-degree throw zoom ring, and a clicked aperture ring with half stops from f3.5 to f22, positioned at the rear end closest to the camera body. One of the benefits is its internal zoom, which means the lens length doesn't change when zooming. This can be beneficial for balancing on a gimbal, as it doesn't shift its weight as much as other lenses. The filter thread size is 72mm. The aperture is relatively fast for its era, allowing for some shallow depth of field and background blur, especially at longer focal lengths. It exhibits noticeable breathing, particularly at the wide end, which can be an issue for video shooting if you want an entirely clean look. This focus breathing doesn't seem to change much when adding or removing the focal reducer. Additionally, it's not parfocal, meaning the focus shifts when zooming. I put the 35 to 105mm through its paces on the Fuji X-H2S. There's no in-camera correction for this lens, so it's pure image quality without any enhancements or corrections. If you'd want a cleaner look, you could always do some post-processing, but I think that would defeat the purpose of acquiring a lens with such character. Now, I think my particular model has some amount of mold on one of the internal elements, so take these tests with a grain of salt. I only noticed this when I was conducting the focus breathing test, so I thought I'd upload the video nonetheless. Alright, let's delve into the image quality. First, without the focal reducer at 35mm. Initially, we're seeing that the center is very soft, coupled with noticeable chromatic aberration in the corners. When we dial down to f5.6, there's a clear boost in sharpness, but the corners are still battling chromatic aberration and some ghosting. Further stopping down to f8, we notice a slight uptick in sharpness, yet the chromatic aberration remains. Moving on to f11, there's another subtle increase in sharpness, especially towards the corners. As we stop down to f16 and beyond, diffraction starts to become very noticeable, reducing the overall image contrast, and at f22, diffraction gets more pronounced, decreasing overall sharpness and contrast again. Now, let's add the focal reducer at 35mm f3.5. We're immediately struck by the softness in the center, with the corners appearing quite blurry. Stopping down improves sharpness slightly, but the corners are still incredibly soft. At f8, center sharpness improves a bit, though the corners remain unclear with plenty of chromatic aberrations. Even at tighter apertures like f11 and f16, the corners don't see much of an increase in clarity. The center sharpness improves a little, but diffraction begins to decrease the overall contrast and sharpness. Surprisingly, the chromatic aberration continues to be a persistent issue. Zooming in to 105mm at f3.5, the center sharpness is decent, although the corners are a lot softer. When stopping down to f5.6 and f8, there is a significant improvement in both center and corner sharpness, although some chromatic aberrations are present. At f11, diffraction starts to affect image contrast, and by f22, it heavily degrades the overall image quality. With the focal reducer on at 105mm f3.5, the corner's softness is very extreme. Improvements in center sharpness are noticeable when stopping down, but corners remain soft with some chromatic aberration. As we stop down further, diffraction increasingly impacts image quality. In terms of aberrations and distortions at 35mm, there's some barrel distortion without the focal reducer and minimal vignetting. With the reducer, barrel distortion becomes more apparent, and vignetting slightly increases. At 105mm, we see a switch to slight pincushion distortion, which becomes more noticeable with the focal reducer. Vignetting is minimal, but improves upon stopping down. Chromatic aberration, as noted before, is quite prominent across various apertures. As for the bokeh quality, at 105mm, it's unremarkable, offering a clean, out-of-focus background. At 35mm, achieving out-of-focus backgrounds is challenging, and the bokeh is less pronounced. With the focal reducer, there's a hint of character and a swirly effect, but it's very minimal. The Fuji X-H2 in-body 5-axis stabilization is effective for reducing some micro jitters, but this degrades at longer focal lengths. Adding the focal reducer does help somewhat, and we don't see any annoying corner wobble, so that's good. So overall, it's an excellent vintage zoom lens, offering versatility, a relatively fast aperture and solid build quality at an affordable price. It produces moderately sharp images but has quite some chromatic aberration across all its stops. Yet for me, this is a positive, as I personally really enjoy the character of these vintage optics. If you're interested in exploring more vintage lenses, check out the next video on the Canon FD 70 to 210mm f4. Another vintage zoom with a very unique design.